Good morning and welcome to the Rapid City Planning Commission meeting for February 9th, 2023. If any member of the audience wishes to speak to an item on the agenda today, there are speaker request forms on the table along the left wall. Please fill out the request with the agenda number of the item you wish to speak to and hand it to the staff seated on the left of the dais. This time we would also like to ask that if any member of the audience has a cell phone or other electronic device, that you either turn it off or turn the ringer to silent. If you need to take a call, please step out to the hallway so the meeting is not disrupted. Items 1 through 4 have been placed on the consent calendar and may be approved as a group today. Action will be taken on all consent items in accordance with staff's recommendation by a single vote. Any item may be removed from the consent calendar by any planning commissioner, staff member, or audience member for separate consideration at this time. The findings of this planning commission are recommendations to the city council. The city council will make the final decision with the exception of the following items. Item 3, 23 PD 002, and item 4, 23 PD 001. The Rapid City Planning Commission's actions on these two items is final unless any party appeals that decision to the Rapid City Council. All appeals must be submitted in writing to the Department of Community Development by close of business on the 7th full calendar day following action by the Planning Commission. Are there any items 1 through 4 that staff would like removed?
No, thank you.
All right. Are there any items 1 through 4 that any planning commissioner would like removed for separate consideration? Number 2. And are there any items that any audience member would like removed for separate consideration? The chair would then entertain a motion to approve items 1, 3, and 4 in accordance with staff's recommendation. All right. Haven made the motion to approve 1, 3, and 4.
Second.
And Vince seconded that motion. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if staff could remind me, we'd seen this one not too long ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. If you could kind of just tell me the differences between then and now.
We've seen different plans on this property at multiple times, and remember, a preliminary subdivision plan, which is what you saw previously, we call that the what if. So someone took a look at this property and decided that they may want to subdivide it, and then they get the list of stipulations that are required and improvements that are required, and evidently they decided not to pursue it. I don't have exactly what that plan was in front of me today, but I'm happy to go through the current plan. Sure. So this is the aerial. This is located north of the northern terminus of Grandview Drive, north of Oakland Street. As you can see, the property is zoned low-density residential 1. Future land use plan also identifies the current or the future land use of the property as low-density neighborhood. And this property is accessed off of Indiana Street and also off Grandview Drive. I think the main access will come from the north on Indiana Street. There's a small piece of right-of-way. And you can see that, you can see that on the zoning map, the white strip to the north that comes straight out of the South Middle School. That is actually platted right of way. So this is their layout for the preliminary subdivision plan. You can see they're proposing to divide this into 3 separate lots, generally between 3 and 3.5 acres. You can see that access is taken from the north on Indiana Street, and they're providing a hammerhead turnaround on the property. They also show a water main that extends from the south off of the northern terminus of Grandview Drive to serve the property. Site photos, this is looking to the south off of Indiana. This is the right-of-way that is platted, and this is how they would take access onto the property. I believe this is known as Grasshopper Hill, that hill, if you're an old-timer in Rapid City, from South Rapid City especially. And then this is looking off to the north from the top of the hill on the northern terminus of Grandview Drive. And then this is looking off to the east. And again, this is a preliminary subdivision plan, so they're just kind of speculating at this point. Does it make sense for them to subdivide this? What type of infrastructure improvements would be required if they were to go through with this plan?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for pulling it, Mike. I had kind of the same thoughts. I'm sure many of us up here did. My recollection is the last time we saw this, they were shooting for 8 or 9 residential lots versus 3, and that just the lower density is what.
Yeah, there are some
me, it was a
significant
good
topographical challenges on this lot, as you can see, so that I think it makes sense to go with larger lots and then be able to, have probably a few more, less, possible building envelope sites to deal with.
Karen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kip,
Yes.
the lot line on the, which would be the west side, is that just where that water line is? Is that the lot line that takes care of lot 27? There's 3 lots up there?
Yes, I believe that water line does follow the lot line, so it's
Okay.
not shown on there.
That's what I figured that. Well, if anybody can get up to the top of the hill in the wintertime, it's probably have a great view.
Yeah, as you can see from the site photos, a great view. And then when Alex was out taking site photos, he basically slipped and had to basically ski down the hill in his dress shoes because it was a little snowy out there. And
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on item 2? All right, Karen made the motion to approve item number 2 with the staff stipulations as listed, and Vince seconded that motion. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 5.
Good morning. Item number 5 is an ordinance amendment to to change the height requirement in the medium-density residential district and the office commercial district. To set the stage, this slide summarizes what the current height limits are in each of our residential districts. In the low-density residential district, there's a height limit of 35 feet and 2.5 stories. In the medium-density residential district, it's 35 feet and 3 stories. The high-density residential district, which is primarily limited to the downtown area, is 65 feet or 7 stories. And in the office commercial district, it's 35 feet and 3 stories. So over the last few years, we've seen several apartment developments. There's been an increase in multifamily development, which has been really great for Rapid City. But looking back over those developments, we've noticed that many of them are asking for height exceptions, and nearly all of them are being approved. So for example, 11 of the major apartment developments since 2019 have requested height exceptions. So in looking for ways that we can streamline the development process, particularly in ways when there's no impact to the community or the built environment, we wanted to bring forward an ordinance amendment that would reflect those exceptions that are coming about very frequently and always being approved. All of those exceptions were approved by the Planning Commission. There was one that was appealed to the City Council but ultimately approved. So our proposal is to increase the height limit in both MDR and office commercial from 35 feet to 40 feet while retaining the stories at a cap of 3 stories. So what have some of those recent height exception projects looked like once they were constructed? I'll just go through a few examples. This apartment development was received its exception in 2019, and it's located at the intersection of Campbell and East Minnesota. Here, the exception was from 35 feet to 38.5 feet. The next example was from 2020. The height exception was from 35 feet to 39 feet. This is in the Johnson Ranch subdivision off of Jaffa Garden Way. And lastly, this is in the Big Sky subdivision off of Bernice Street. This height exception was granted in 2022, and it allowed 39.5 feet in lieu of 35 feet. And the photograph on the left is the structure that received the exception. And it's interesting, the photo on the right there is another 3-story apartment building that had no height exception. So you can see that those couple of feet really, there's hardly any visual impact of that change. So kind of looking at all of these examples, we see that there's very minimal impact, and that we anticipate that this amendment will eliminate the need for hopefully several exceptions and help to streamline the review process for some apartment buildings. We, as a commission and as staff, have been talking pretty regularly about height increases in Rapid City, so we see this ordinance amendment as kind of a first step, quick win. We could even maybe call it a baby step, but hopefully a step in the right direction, and we'd like to do more research and analysis and bring forward other height amendments across the city and perhaps in other districts. But for now, this is kind of a simple strike-through amendment that would change the height from 35 feet to 45 feet. The proposed ordinance language was attached to the agenda, and it's on the screen here if you have any questions. I do want to thank Kinsley Grote in the Attorney's Office for assisting us with this ordinance amendment. She helps to make sure we have all our T's crossed and I's dotted, and we appreciate her assistance very much. So I'll stand for any questions you may have. We are recommending that this ordinance amendment be approved.
Thank you, Sarah. Vince?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. If I could, I'm trying to remember the reason why the height restrictions on those were requested, and it was to provide more space inside the rooms so that anyone that's living there now has a ceiling height a few feet higher than what it would have been. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair.
Sarah?
Yes, that's correct. It's a great question and a good point to bring up. Because the height is still limited to 3 stories, what we're seeing with that extra space is more ceiling space and, you know, a more comfortable living area for those who are living there.
Okay, thank you.
Haven?
I think you kind of answered my thoughts on this. It's kind of a small move, and there's others I think that we've considered also height exceptions, but I think you kind of indicated that this was the first step, and you were looking at the possibility of some modifications in other ordinances.
That's correct.
Because presumably the Block 5 development there, I know we did some action on that, but apparently we would have approved an exception to the height on that.
Mr. Chair, if I may address that.
Sarah?
The Block 5 project is a good question because that will be one of our taller buildings in Rapid City. That project happens to be located in a central business district where there is no height limit. So there was not an exception for height required for that building.
Thank you.
Eric Hikas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a good first step. We are kind of weighty on ordinances in Rapid City for a community of our size. Some streamlining is a good thing, in my opinion. I move approval on this item. Thank you.
All right, Eric Hikas made the motion to approve item number 5. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, Karen seconded that motion. And I'll go to Karen with comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I just have a couple items to visit with you about. Is there any exception that we looked at that we denied, that said was not a good idea, other than that one?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So I went back to 2019 and pulled every plan development application and looked at which ones were for apartment buildings. And all of them that requested exceptions were approved with the exception of that one that was appealed to council. And then so for apartment structures that did not have a plan development associated with them, there wouldn't have been a height exception beyond what's allowed administratively in the code. So this should be a pretty representative example over the last 3 years of history.
Okay, thank you. Have one other question. It's just for me. The last section of the ordinance itself is for 1740-050, the height restrictions in that area. And can you tell me what, not that one, sorry, 1750. What is 1750? I can't remember. Is that the exception rules? Is that the, you remember what ordinance number that is, 1750, what that is?
Could you clarify your question? The ordinance amendment is to revise 17.12 and 17.40.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe I'm not very clear. It's at the very bottom, and it's just talks about the main buildings shall not exceed 3 stories, and it's the very end of the ordinance amendment as a whole. And within that ordinance amendment, it just talks about 17.50.26. And just for me, I just was curious to know what section that is out of the ordinance. Kip, do you know?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Kip.
1750 is supplemental regulations. I can tell you what that is real quickly here. Sarah will look it up too. It'll be a race.
Kip will win this race.
Yeah. Tanner's got it. 1750-260 is height, and that's in our supplemental regulations.
Okay,
Thank you,
that's
Tanner.
what I was trying to remember, what that regulation was in that ordinance. So that's all I needed. I just was curious. Thank you.
All right, so the motion on the floor and seconded is to approve. I don't have any other lights up, so I'm going to jump in. Chip, does the fire department have any concerns on raising the height of these structures? Because they're very typical buildings around town.
Mr. Chair, no, there's no concern for us. Our ladder trucks will reach that area. And also, with this type of height raising, it gives the architect engineer more leeway on the type of rafter system and not such a flatter roof, but can increase the pitch a little bit on the roof too, so snow load and things like that.
Wonderful. Haven?
I did notice another change I hadn't noticed before, there's a deletion of what was sub E for, which was a front yard requirement that's included in this amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Sarah?
That's a great question. That was a cleanup to an error that existed in the current code. So that was to section 17.12 for medium density residential district. Within our area regulations, there are different requirements for side yard depending on the height of the building. And we noticed that there was this reference to buildings that are 5 stories within the medium density residential district. However, that was in conflict with the next section on height, which capped height at 3 stories. So it was an existing kind of conflict between the code. So we took this opportunity to remove that reference to 5 stories because it was not allowed based on the height section.
All right, any other questions or comments from the commission? The motion is to approve. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve this ordinance amendment, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, that takes us to the end of our exhaustive meeting today. Any planning commission items since we have time? Brooke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Sarah, this is just a follow-up question because at Coffee with Planners, I think we talked about something very similar with the sizes of garages that people are requesting. Do you think that's something that we'll see that's going to be pretty similar to this?
That's a good question. That's on our radar as well. We have several ordinance amendments that we want to bring forward. The garage, the size of garages probably isn't as high of a priority as some of our other ordinance amendments, but we definitely have that on the radar as well.
Thank you.
All right, anything else from the commission, staff?
We have a
Oh,
new
Sarah.
member in the crowd today. We'd like to introduce
All
our
right.
new special projects planner. This is Jonathan Howard.
Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair and Commission. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been here a couple weeks so far with my family. I'm a native from Virginia, a Navy veteran, and a musician as well. And my background is mostly like an MPO and transportation. And I'm very happy to be here in the Planning Projects Division and kind of broadening my skill set and also helping out with other planning department duties. So I'll be around and look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Vince?
Welcome, and go Navy.
All right, Mike, I think. Okay, Mike made the motion to adjourn, and Vince seconded. I heard him first there. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.